Brexit. Theresa May to chair Chequers brainstorm. Theresa May is to chair a meeting of her cabinet at Chequers to discuss the UK's approach to leaving the EU and its objectives in future negotiations. The Prime Minister and senior ministers will gather together to debate the way forward amid reports of tensions and diverging priorities among key figures. Those present will include David Davis, Boris Johnson and Liam Fox, each of whose departments is focused on Brexit. Mrs May has said talks with the rest of the EU will not begin this year. BBC political correspondent Tom Bateman said Mrs May had asked every cabinet minister before the summer break to identify what were described as the opportunities for their departments, and she will now expect them to report back. The Prime Minister has said the UK government will not trigger Article 50, the official mechanism for beginning the process of separation, until the start of 2017 at the earliest. From that moment, discussions over the terms of the UK's exit will conclude in 2 years unless all 28 members of the EU agree to extend them. The UK voted to leave the EU by a margin of 51.9% to 48.1%. in a referendum on the 23rd of June, and Mrs May, who became Prime Minister in its aftermath, has insisted that Brexit will mean Brexit, but the relationship the UK will have with the EU after its exit, in terms of access to the EU internal market and obligations in regard to freedom of movement, remains unclear. Orderly departure. Wednesday's meeting at the Prime Minister's country residence is being seen as an opportunity for Mrs May and senior colleagues to talk through many issues involved ahead of this weekend's summit of G20 leaders in China. The talks are being billed as the most significant since the referendum result and mark an end to the relative lull in proceedings over the summer recess, which ends on Monday. Mrs May, who has held face-to-face talks with the leaders of Germany, France, Italy, Ireland, Poland and Slovakia since taking office, has said time is needed to determine the UK's strategy as a sensible and orderly departure is in the national interest. But several senior Conservatives have warned against undue delay and said nothing should stand in the way of the UK triggering Article 50 as soon as possible next year. Among those round the table with Mrs May will be Chancellor Philip Hammond, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, International Trade Secretary Liam Fox and David Davis, Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Mr Johnson, Mr Fox and Mr Davis are reported to have held private talks last week amid reports of early disagreements over the shape of a future Brexit settlement and departmental responsibility for trade issues. Speaking on Tuesday, a Number 10 spokesman said the government's focus was on establishing the UK's negotiating position and priorities with regard to the EU. Although MPs would have a say on the timing of talks, there was no legal requirement to consult Parliament before Article 50 was activated, he said. Downing Street has also confirmed that Mrs May will not hold a second referendum or an early general election to give voters the chance to sign off on any deal struck between the UK and the EU. Chequers, an isolated 16th-century mansion 40 miles northwest of London,